G'day, I'm Yuki-san Dev, and in part 16 of the series Unity for the Absolute Beginner, we will be saving game data such as a high score to the computer using JSON. Alrighty, today I'm going to go over saving your game data such as high scores, names, etc. to the computer so they can be retrieved again when you rerun the game. Again, I'm going to use game 1 that we made earlier in the series since it's already a functioning and simple game with the player's name and a scoring system. We will save the high score with the name of the person who made it. Then when you run the game, you will always see who made the highest score. There are two main ways to save to the computer, and this video will go through the first one, so let's get into it. Now, before we start, if you are actually following along and are using game 1 in the last video, then at the end I showed you a couple of errors created by putting everything in the persistent data script. What I should have done at the end of that video was showed you how to fix that error. So here it is real quick. In your menu scene, create an empty object and name it something like menu handler. Then create a scripts in your scripts folder and call it the same. Drag the script onto the menu handler object. Then open your persistent data script and cut the function and the name error object container out and paste it into your new menu handler script. So your persistent data script should look like this, and your menu handler script should look like this, and then save both scripts. Then click your player's name object in the canvas, scroll down and change the on-end edit string from the persistent data to menu handler. Click the menu handler object and drag the name error object from the hierarchy into the name error container. And that's it. Now you can navigate back to the menu anytime and everything knows where everything is. And all persistent data is doing right now is holding the player name. Okay, so outside of that, let's get started. Okay, so in this game we have two pieces of data that we want to save. We have the player's name and the score. Now, since we already have the player's name in our persistent data, and that's visible from every scene, and our score is handled by the main manager script, so the first thing I'm going to do is put the score in persistent data. It doesn't have to be there, but it's just nice to have the both of them in the same place. Makes it easier to follow. So double click the persistent data script to open it. Alrighty, all I'm going to do in here is add a variable for the player score. So public int player score and save. And now double click our game manager script to open it. So we can take out private int score equals 0 because persistent data is now going to keep track. Also, we need to change the score in our update score function to persistent data .instance .player score in both places. Now it will update the player score in our persistent data each time it's called. Cool, and save. And a quick test run to make sure everything's working. Have a look at my persistent data. Player name and score are there. Enter a name. Get some points, score going up. Yep, cool. So now our persistent data is handling both. So when the game ends, we want the score and the player name to be written to disk in a file. That's pretty much what this video is supposed to be about, right? So I'm going to put all the saving and loading into the persistent data script. I'm going to have it there for this game to make things simpler. So double click persistent data script to open it. So since we want to display the last player with their score when the game runs next time, we're going to need two more variables. So let's do public string high score name and public int high score. Alright, so we're going to save our data to a JSON file, JSON. JSON now is pretty widely used amongst lots of games and applications, and it's pretty commonplace. If you've ever tinkered around with Minecraft, you would have noticed that there's JSON files all over the place. Now, the JSON format is not the only way to save data, but it is pretty good for something simple like this. So the first thing we have to do is serialize the data we want to save. Serializing is just converting our data into a simpler format to be stored. It's hard to imagine an integer and a string to be any simpler than they already are, but imagine something else like a vector. JSON is not going to store that data as something like this, so it needs to be simplified. Anyway, regardless of how simple it is or is not, it needs to be serialized anyway. So let's make a new class with variables that will be serializable. So just before the last curly bracket in the script, type in square brackets, system.serializable. And then class save stuff. And put a couple of curly brackets in there, and in between them, put public string j high score name and public int j high score. Now you might ask, why are we recreating these two variables that are already in the persistent data class? It's because those variables are not serializable. And well, then you might ask, well, why not just make persistent data class serializable? You could, and yep, it would work. But imagine if you had 20 or more variables in that class, but you're only going to save 2 of them, then having them all serializable is a little bit overkill. So it's just kind of cleaner to keep all the IO stuff separate. It can make things look awfully confusing at first, but once you get it, it will probably become second nature. Also to note, I've just put a J in front of the variables down here just to remind me that these are the ones being saved and loaded. So far we've created this IO class, if you like, and just declared 2 variables that are serializable, and then in a minute we will assign the values to them. Now up top we need to add a using statement to add our input-output system. So up here, type in using system.io. Need that for basic input-output to work. Now let's just type in the rest of the code, and then I'll explain the whole thing. I think might be easier. So again, just before the last curly bracket in the script, we will create a function that will save our data. And make sure this function isn't inside the save stuff class. So type in public void save score, and then in between the curlies of that function, type in save stuff data equals new save stuff, and then data dot j high score name equals player name, and then data j high score equals player score, and then string JSON equals JSON utility dot to JSON data in brackets, and then finally file dot write all text application dot persistent data path plus, and then in speech marks a backslash high score dot JSON comma JSON. All right, a little bit to get through here. So as I said before, we have created a separate class to hold serializable variables so that we can use them for writing to a JSON file. Now we've created a function that can be called from anywhere in the game to save the data. Then we've created an instance of save stuff and assigned the variables to the same value that persistent data has. So let's say the player name was Ryuki and the score was 32. Then we have retrieved those values, and now they are temporarily stored in J high score name and J high score. Then we created a local string variable named JSON. You could use any name you like, doesn't have to be JSON. Then we used JSON utility to JSON, which is a built-in function to convert our data to JSON format. So the JSON string would look something like this. So now we have savable data. Then the last step is to save the string to a JSON file named highscore.json. The application.persistentData path is the default path, and it's best to keep it set to that path so that your application can work across different platforms. If you were to try to specify something else like C/documents or something, and then somebody played this on a mobile phone, then it wouldn't work. So application.persistentData path will always work because it'll put it wherever it's supposed to be for that device. On a PC, what is the file path? Well, let's save the script and get back to the editor and I'll show you. So click on Edit and select Project Settings. Then select Player if it's not already selected. So the path on your PC is going to be C:\users and then another backslash and then whoever the user is that's logged in. And then another backslash appdata and then backslash local low and then a backslash and then it's going to be the company name, which is in this window here, and the product name from this window here. So for mine, this is what my data path would look like. So after this game runs and that file is written, that's where I will be able to find it. Alright, so we have the function to save, so now we just need to call it. So let's call it when the game ends. So double click the player script to open it. So all we're going to do here is add a line to the collision script for when the game ends. So we just type in persistent data dot instance dot save high score. So this is calling the function save high score from our persistent data to save the data. So let's save this. Okay, make sure you are in the menu scene and run. Type a name, play a little bit, make some points here. Lose. Alright, let's go see if our file is there. So browse in your File Explorer to the path. And there it is. Now you can open this with Notepad or Notepad++ or something similar, and you can see our data has been saved. Cool. Okay, so now we want to work on loading this data back when we run the game again. So let's get back into our persistent data script. Now we will create another function to load the data from the same JSON file, and as you might guess, it's just a reverse of save. So let's do the code first. So underneath the save function, let's do a new function, public void load high score. And in between the curlies, string path equals application.persistentDataPath plus, and in speech marks, backslash high score.json. And then if file exists, path, and then in between those curlies, string JSON equals file.readAllText path, and save stuff data equals JSON utility from JSON save stuff, and in brackets JSON, and high score name equals data.jHighScore name, and finally high score equals data.jHighScore. Okay, so now I've just realized that I probably could have given save stuff a better name, something like input output or something like that, but it's fine, it works. So firstly, we created a local string named path, and that is to temporarily hold the full path and the file name of what we want to load from. Then we have an if statement that's just basically saying if the file exists, then continue, so that if the game was never run before and the file doesn't exist, then you won't get an error. Then pretty much everything is reversed. So we have a new local variable JSON to hold the data string again. Then we're using the JSON utility from JSON to change the data back from JSON format. And then finally assigning those variable values from the data back into our persistent data variable slots. Confused? It can be for a time. but just follow the flow a few times through and you will get it. So now all we need to do is call the load function. So up in our await method, type in load high score. And we're done. So let's save our script. So if we play this now and click on our persistent data object in the hierarchy, and you should be seeing the high score and name filled in from the last score that you made earlier. Now if you enter a different name in and play the game, get a few points here, get hit, and stop the game, and play the game again, and there it is. Cool. Okay, so the saving and loading is done. Now there's a couple of extra things we could do for this particular game 1, so if you are following along with this game and are keen to carry on, then let's go. So I want to see the high score displayed in the game, and I want the high score to actually be the high score. Right now, when you finish the game, it just writes the score and the name to the file no matter what your score is. So let's change that as well. So first off, really quick, I want the high score data to update when I press the restart button, so we don't have to keep exiting the game each time I want it to reset. So really quick, I can just jump into the game manager script. And in the restart game function, I just add the line persistent data .instance .load high score. And something else I forgot probably in the previous video is to add a line in there to reset the score when you press restart. So let's add persistent data .instance .player score equals 0. So now when you click restart, your score will be reset to 0. Earlier without this, it would have just accumulated each time. Okay, let's save this back to the editor. Alright, so first we want to display the high score in the gameplay scene. So let's get into the gameplay scene. And right click the canvas and select text, Text Mesh Pro. I'm going to name mine high score display. And turn off the wrapping. And I'm just going to move mine up to the top middle. And don't forget about the anchor presets as well. Okay, now I'm going to use the Game Manager script to set the text in it. So into the Game Manager script. And let's make a reference to that GUI text object we just created with public Text Mesh Pro U GUI high score display. And then in our start method, we just type in high score display dot set text, and then in speech marks high score, and then plus persistent data dot instance high score name plus, and then just a colon in speech marks, and plus again persistent data dot instance dot high score. So that line is just updating that text object we created with the player's name and the score. Now let's save this. Then click on our Game Manager object in the hierarchy and then drag high score display object into the high score display and back into the menu scene and run. Enter a name. Cool, there's the high score. A little hard to see. Maybe I should change the color and make it bold or something like that. Okay, so the last thing to do is only save the score if it is higher than the one that's already there, so that it's a true high score. So back into the player script. Okay, so when we lose, we are just simply running save high score every time. So let's change that with a simple if. So inside our collision function, type in if persistent data dot instance dot player score is bigger than persistent data dot instance dot high score, and then drag the save high score call into the curlies. So now the save high score will only run if you actually got a high score, if the score that you just made is bigger than the one that's on file. So let's save and run. So first of all, let's play the game and get a lower score than the high score to make sure it doesn't write. Okay, and that hasn't written anything there. No, it's still the same. Cool. And then play again. And this time get a higher score. Cool. And then back. And there it is. Sweet. So it's only writing if the score we make is higher than the one that's already on file. And don't forget, you can always navigate to that JSON file and edit it if you need to make the score lower. Now there's other stuff you could do here. You could make a label that says you got a high score and only show it when they actually get a high score, etc. I'll leave that all up to you. Alrighty, so just a quick recap of the save process again. So do make sure that you are using system.io. That's for all your IO stuff in the script. Make any variables you want to save serializable. If they are not serializable, then JSON utility will give errors. Assign the variables if not already done. Create the JSON string to be written to file. And write the file. I won't recap load because it's basically just a reverse of save. Okay, so in the next video, which should pop out a little quicker this time, it will be a continuation of this one. It will cover saving the same data to the registry rather than using a file. And we'll be using player press to do it. It just involves making a few changes to the persistent data script. So I hope to see you in the next video.